So history isn't just a record of what happened. It's a reflection or a mirror that shows where we came from, what transpired, lessons we have learned, or lessons we keep ignoring. So, is Africa a new battleground for the two world powers, United States and China? If you look closely, you will see history repeating itself. Yeah, in the past, the colonial powers controlled Africa through force. But today, powerful nations want to control Africa through finance, influence, technology. So instead of armies, they send investors. Yeah, instead of chains, they give you loans. Instead of plantations, they change it to trade deals, change it to mining deals that will be very favorable to them. So who do you blame? So it's always like that. Whenever you cannot control your will or control your resources or control your wealth or control how things goes on around you, other people will help you do that. So back to the topic of today. Is Africa a new battleground for? So since 1884, with the scramble of Africa up until today, we've not really seen more changes in Africa. Whose fault or who is to be blamed? History is supposed to keep you in the know, give you an awareness. Awareness is the first step to freedom, true freedom. So when Africans keeps ignoring history, it's risking a lot. It might not be the same form of events that happened in the past, maybe a recycled one this time, but definitely the same outcome. So just imagine this, from slave trade to colonial rule, to neocolonialism, to imperialism, and now presently, these two powerful nations are buying properties in African communities that should serve most of those community members to support their families. For example, many investors from the United States and China get into African countries and lease lands for up to 100 years. Just to buttress my point, a US registered company secured a 50-year lease on 20,000 hectares of land in northern Senegal just to grow alfalfa for export near a freshwater lake, restricting the farmers and herders from having access to their lands and water. Many Chinese firms hold very large commercial firms in many parts of African countries under very long lease, restricting locals from having access to these lands, effectively controlling customary lands that is supposed to support the locals and their food system. So now Africa is no longer a continent that is so rich in mineral and natural resources like seen in the past, where they can come, take whatever they want and export it back home to be used in their home countries. Now, these countries, superpowers are bringing in their firms into African countries to establish right into African continents. The United States' presence in Africa, which has promised African countries democracy, to support African democracies in most African nations, and to give Africans heads, even though with strings attached with most of the heads that the United States has given to African countries. Is Africa-China relations better or Africa-US relations better? Because behind those smiling handshakes and summits lies a deeper game, a battle for control, power, and influence over African continent. Another quick fact to remember is that none of these two countries, be it China or the United States, colonized any African nation, talk less of independence. But both China and the United States has vast financial and economic influence and interest in Africa. Well, the US interest in Africa is mainly on propagating democracy, like I said earlier, human rights, Western values, but can easily turn blind eyes against any country or towards any country that the United States has no interest in. While China's relations with African countries, well, on a scale of 1 to 100 can be scaled for 60-40, or okay, let's say 50-50, because China has built railways, has built bridges, has built major roads in Africa, even though most of those roads are still paid or given as loans. So while it comes to African relations with China, China has been a fair partner to Africa because China's policy, foreign policy with African countries has always been on non-intervention in African politics. But that has always been the case also because looking at the colonial times, the colonial powers built railways that connects farm produce or raw materials from their sources or from their sites to where they can be shipped directly to their countries, to seaports Why these two powers are presently in Africa, China and the United States, for their interests, be it on fair scale or for crude purposes. So, what now for Africa? What is the next move for African countries? Well, Africa as a whole, most African countries has open hands, wanted to have deals with both United States and China. But recently, with the waves of new policies under Trump's administration, against African countries, most African nations seems to open more friendly doors for China. China seems to be really digging deep, deeper to win Africa's heart. But wait, to what end and at what cost? Because this is one of the things African countries should learn from the colonial powers and all these Western powers, that there can't be any free gifts. Let's just rewind a bit. What the United States relations has been with Africa, or the long dance with African countries before China showed up on the scene. If you can recall the history, after African countries started getting independence in the 1950s into 60s, the US saw African countries mostly through the Cold War lens. So the US goal was simple, to stop the spread of communism and to support any friendly regimes, even dictators, so long as they don't align with the Soviet Union, now Russia. So with some of the aids that the United States provided to most of these countries, be it military or aids, they came with strings attached, like in form of political alignment, military corporations, and allowing access to these countries' natural resources. So by 1990, after the Cold War ended, the US interest in Africa started fading. So the trade agreements, humanitarian aids, HIV reliefs, and other things, other programs that promote democracy in Africa were continued through the PEPFAR and the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act by the United States. By that time, as interest of the United States was fading out of Africa, China came into Africa, or will I say leach into Africa, either way, but they came with infrastructure, technology, because China was already built up. As against what China was in 1970, by 1990, China's economy was already transformed and they are looking for more investments outside of China. And presently, China has been the biggest trading partner with Africa, with a trade of about 250 billion US dollars every year. A new thought, right? Let's look at it this way. While the United States came with aids and democracy talks, and China came with money for investments, but Africa can tell, or we can't tell what the foreign policies of these two superpowers will be towards Africa in the next 20, 30 years to come. And mind you, both China and the United States are very rich, vast in natural resources. But these two countries feel the need to keep more resources and more growth. And where do they find these things? Or where do they find more natural resources? Africa. And let's call to mind for Africa. In the 1970s, China was a very poor, struggling country to feed itself. But instead of waiting for aids, they changed their mindset. And today, from 1970 to 2025, China became one of the world's superpower. China became the factory of this planet Earth and lifting over 800 million people out of poverty. So Africa has whatever it takes to be a top-notch continent, a top-notch country, like China. Africa has the human resources, has the natural resources, has the land mass. Africa has it all. So let me know what your thoughts are. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. And here in this channel, I like to talk about things that concerns Africa. Please do not forget to subscribe. See you on the next one.